How far would a broken CEO go to save his empire, when the only person who can help him is the one he once overlooked? This is the story of a millionaire who took his housekeeper to a business center, and what she did shocked everyone. Keep watching to find out how the story unfolds. Where are you watching our videos from? Drop your location in the comment below. Connor Whitfield was, in the eyes of many, a man born for success. The CEO of Whitfield Enterprises, he was renowned for his ruthless efficiency, sharp intelligence, and the effortless way he commanded any room. But those who worked closest to him knew another side, one that wasn't as infallible as the headline suggested. Connor was shrewd, yes, but his demanding, distant nature had taken its toll. He had built his life around wealth and power, yet in recent months, his empire was showing signs of strain. A financial crisis loomed, and whispers of his collapsing personal life traveled through the offices. A fresh divorce had left him isolated, his allies growing scarce, and his once ironclad reputation now appeared vulnerable. His company was slipping from his grasp. In the shadow of his grandeur and struggles stood Mia Lopes, his housekeeper. Mia had been a quiet but constant presence in Connor's life for years. She managed his sprawling estate with grace and efficiency, handling every detail without complaint. Mia's manner was respectful yet reserved, a kind face in a household that had seen Connor's coldest and most distant moments. Yet her calm demeanor concealed a story of her own, a story she kept hidden from Connor and everyone else. Mia wasn't always a housekeeper. Once, she was on the verge of a promising career as a business consultant. She had been ambitious, deeply knowledgeable about corporate strategy, and quickly rising in the industry. However, one fateful event had derailed everything. Her former boss, a powerful executive, had framed her in a scandal that destroyed her reputation. She lost her job, her credibility, and with it, the life she had worked so hard to build. Stripped of her career and her dreams, Mia had quietly faded into the background, taking up humble work to support herself while keeping a low profile. Over time, she adapted to a simpler life, though the disappointment lingered beneath her steady exterior. One evening, as Mia polished the mahogany shelves in Connor's study, she felt his piercing gaze on her back. She turned, surprised to see him there, pacing with a tension that hinted at something urgent. His eyes fell on her with a look she hadn't seen before, calculating, as though weighing an option he hadn't considered until that moment. "Mia," he said, his tone cold and direct, "I need you to accompany me to a dinner tonight. No need for any special opinions or advice. Just be there, look presentable, and stay quiet." His words hung in the air, blunt and devoid of kindness, as if he were discussing a prop rather than a person. Stunned, Mia couldn't find words for a moment. She had never once been included in his public life, and his demand left no room for her to decline. The Connor she knew wouldn't ask if he wasn't desperate. In a flash, she understood. This wasn't an invitation. It was an instruction, one he expected her to obey without question. To him, she was a convenient choice, and perhaps the only woman in his life who wouldn't refuse. She would be the perfect silent companion, someone to stand by him without interfering. After the initial shock, Maya felt an unexpected surge of defiance. She recognized that Connor's desperation could be her opportunity. She would step into his world, even if just for one night, and she would do it on her terms. This dinner would not be about Connor's convenience alone. It would be her chance to show, even subtly, the woman she truly was. She nodded in quiet acceptance, her mind already preparing. "Fine," she replied. "I'll be ready." As she dressed later that evening, Maya found herself considering the strangeness of her situation. Here she was, after years in the background, about to re-enter the world she had long left behind. Her wardrobe wasn't designed for this occasion, but she managed to find a simple, elegant dress that would do. She took one last look in the mirror, adjusting her hair and feeling a flicker of the person she once was, the woman who once walked confidently into boardrooms, who used to carry the weight of authority. She drew a steadying breath. Memories surged back to her as she made her way to the car that Connor had arranged for them. The old feelings returned, the thrill of strategy, the power of negotiation, the ability to command respect. She remembered the day her career ended, the day she lost her faith in the corporate world. Her boss, in a moment of betrayal, had pinned his own missteps on her. She had fallen from the industry's grace, her name smeared in the press, her reputation left in tatters. Now, after years of quiet work and survival, she found herself at the threshold of that world once again. Connor had no idea what he had awakened by asking her to attend tonight's dinner. He didn't know her past, didn't know the skills she had once held, and certainly didn't suspect the strength she could bring if only given a chance. In the car, Connor was his usual self, distant, scrolling through messages on his phone, barely acknowledging her presence. But this time, Mia wasn't troubled by his aloofness. She felt a strange sense of calm and resolve, knowing that while Connor might see her as his compliant, convenient accessory, she held knowledge and insights he couldn't imagine. As they drew closer to the restaurant, Mia gazed out the window, reflecting on the opportunity before her. For Connor, this was just a dinner, another corporate meeting he needed to survive to keep his business from collapsing. For Mia, it was something else entirely. This was her chance to reassert herself, to bring her skills and intelligence back into the light. Connor's careless invitation had stirred something in her, a quiet but fierce resolve she hadn't felt in years. The restaurant's dim lighting cast a soft glow over the white tablecloths and crystal glasses, the kind of setting designed to impress. Connor strode in with Mia by his side, barely acknowledging her as he guided her to the private dining room, where a group of high-powered investors awaited. Maya took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of judgmental glances before she even stepped into the room. As they entered, the investors' eyes turned sharply toward them, their gazes lingering on Mia's understated appearance. In her simple dress, she stood in stark contrast to the polished, designer-clad women they were accustomed to seeing on Connor's arm. One by one, their expressions shifted from surprise to thinly veiled disdain. The leader of the group, Wesley Grant, a sharp-featured man known for his ruthless business moves, arched an eyebrow at her, his lips curving into a smirk. Connor cleared his throat. "Everyone, this is Mia," he said with a flick of his hand, as though that single name were all anyone needed to know. He didn't bother to elaborate, and the omission hung in the air like a silent declaration. Maya felt herself flush slightly but remained composed, meeting the eyes of each investor with a calm, steady gaze. If Connor's goal was to keep her invisible, he had certainly failed at the first impression. The other investors exchanged subtle smirks and glances, clearly puzzled by her presence. To them, she didn't belong here. She was an outsider, the unglamorous woman in a room full of wealth and polished elegance. Wesley was the first to speak, his voice laced with mock warmth. "Connor," he said, looking at Mia with a glint in his eye, "I see you've chosen a unique guest this evening." Connor gave a forced, tight smile. "Yes, well, Mia is here for support," he replied, his tone leaving no doubt that her role was meant to be minimal. Wesley's gaze flicked over to Mia, lingering for a moment too long. "Support, is it?" he repeated, eyes narrowing as if appraising a hidden flaw in a piece of jewelry. "Well, Mia," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "I'm sure the conversations about millions and market shares might be a bit overwhelming. But don't worry, we'll keep things simple." The table erupted into a few polite chuckles, but Maya felt the sting of Wesley's words. She glanced briefly at Connor, who gave her a barely perceptible shake of his head, as if urging her to stay silent. But she wouldn't remain silent tonight, not after all she'd been through to be here. Taking a steady breath, Maya looked Wesley directly in the eye and replied calmly, "Actually, I find it fascinating to see how profits tend to rise when people feel valued, rather than being treated like disposable assets." The laughter ceased immediately, replaced by stunned silence. Wesley's confident smirk faltered for a split second as the investors absorbed Mia's unexpected response. Her insight had caught them off guard, and she could feel their judgmental stares transform into something else: curiosity, perhaps even respect. Wesley's eyes gleamed with intrigue, while Connor seemed momentarily at a loss, his usual composure slightly rattled. "Oh," Wesley replied, recovering quickly with a smile that was both impressed and challenging. "Interesting perspective, Mia. And may I ask where you picked up such an insight?" Maya returned his smile with one of her own, calm and unfazed. "Observing how businesses succeed or fail is something anyone can do if they pay attention," she replied. "People's motivations, morale, and trust in leadership, they're often what hold a company together, even more than raw numbers." The table was silent again, and Mia could sense Wesley's interest grow. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he searched her face for more hints of who she really was. "You make it sound so simple," he mused, clearly intrigued. "And yet so few leaders seem to master this art. Tell me, Mia, what would you do in Connor's position right now, with Whitfield Enterprises facing its challenges?" Connor, who had been watching her with a mixture of shock and irritation, shifted in his seat. This was exactly what he wanted to avoid. Maya was supposed to be invisible, silent support, not someone engaging in a discussion about the survival of his company. But Mia met Wesley's gaze calmly, her mind working quickly. She knew exactly what she would do if she were in Connor's place, but she also knew that saying so would irritate him further. Still, something inside her felt emboldened, and she realized that she was done with staying quiet. "Well," she began, her voice steady, "if I were in that position, I'd prioritize the team and the morale of those still working there. People stay with a company when they feel valued, even in difficult times. Rebuilding confidence from the inside is often the best foundation for outward success." The investors murmured among themselves, some nodding slightly. Wesley looked at her with newfound appreciation, his smirk fading into a genuine, contemplative expression. Connor, on the other hand, sat stiffly, his irritation now barely concealed. Mia had not only stepped outside her role, but was capturing the attention of the room, the attention he'd expected to command himself. As the dinner went on, Wesley continued to draw Mia into the conversation, his questions probing deeper. "Mia, you seem to understand the subtle art of leadership well. Do you have experience in business, or are you simply a natural?" Mia offered a nonchalant smile, choosing her words carefully. "I've had my share of experience," she replied. "I've seen what works and what doesn't, often from a close vantage point." Wesley's gaze grew sharper, and Connor clenched his jaw, shooting her a look that was both confused and wary. The more she spoke, the more Connor sensed his own control slipping. She was moving from the background into the spotlight, a place he hadn't expected her to claim. By now, Wesley's interest had shifted entirely to her. "You know, Mia, it's rare to find someone with such insights," he said, leaning back in his chair thoughtfully. "Connor, I had no idea you had such perceptive company at your side." Connor's irritation flared. "Yes, well, Mia is just helping out," he replied sharply, trying to reclaim the upper hand. But his attempt to dismiss her fell flat. Mia had already made her mark, and the investors' shifting expressions showed it. As the evening wound down, Connor could feel his carefully crafted image slipping. What was meant to be a simple dinner with Mia as a silent accessory had turned into something else entirely. He could feel Wesley watching her closely, his interest in her growing with every passing minute. And while Connor could not place his finger on why, he felt something unsettling stir inside him. A mix of envy, irritation, and for the first time, a fear that Maya was more than she seemed. He just didn't know what her next move would be. The dinner had barely begun when Wesley Grant, ever the strategist, sensed there was more to Mia than met the eye. Her quiet confidence, her seemingly effortless knowledge of business dynamics. This wasn't the profile of a housekeeper. His curiosity piqued, He covertly signaled to his assistant, who quickly slipped out of the dining room to start digging into Mia's background. Wesley knew the signs of someone hiding a story, and he wasn't about to let a mystery pass by unexplored. Minutes later, his assistant returned, leaning down to whisper in Wesley's ear. The look on Wesley's face shifted from interest to outright delight. He glanced across the table at Mia with a new spark in his eye, almost as though he'd stumbled upon buried treasure. He gave a barely there nod to his assistant, silently acknowledging the information. The game, for Wesley, had suddenly become far more interesting. Waiting until a lull in the conversation, Wesley leaned forward, his voice smooth and casual. "Mia," he said, letting her name linger in the air. "I had no idea I was in the presence of such a remarkable background. It turns out you're not just Connor's housekeeper, are you?" The table fell silent. Mia's face remained composed, but a faint flicker of surprise crossed her eyes. Connor, on the other hand, looked stunned, his gaze darting between Wesley and Mia with barely concealed confusion. Wesley continued, a sly smile playing on his lips. "Once an ambitious consultant at Lawson & Grace, I believe, known for your sharp strategies and impressive acumen." His words were soft but struck the table like a hammer, reverberating with the weight of her past. "I must say, I'd love to know how you ended up in Connor's employ." Gasps and whispers followed Wesley's revelation, and every eye turned to Mia. She was no longer just Connor's silent companion. She was a seasoned professional who had once stood among them, until her name was tarnished by scandal. Her calm facade never faltered as she met Wesley's gaze with a subtle but defiant smile. Connor, however, looked shell-shocked, his mind racing to piece together this unexpected truth. How could his housekeeper, a woman he had overlooked countless times, possess a background as a high-level consultant? His grip tightened around his glass as he fought to mask the fury and humiliation simmering within him. Wesley pressed on, his tone deliberately inviting. "Mia, I can only imagine what happened to derail such a promising career. But I'll tell you this, if you ever want to step back into the world of corporate strategy, I have a place on my team for you." His eyes gleamed with mischief as he looked pointedly at Connor, enjoying his rival's discomfort. "A woman with your talents shouldn't be hidden away." The silence around the table was palpable as everyone waited for Mia's response. Connor shot her a sharp glare, silently willing her to turn down Wesley's offer. But Mia, now thrust into the spotlight she had long shied away from, found herself invigorated. She was tired of being the invisible one, reduced to the background by people who knew nothing of her capabilities. Smiling graciously at Wesley, she replied, "That's an incredibly generous offer, Wesley. I appreciate it, and I'll certainly keep it in mind." Her words hung delicately in the air, filled with a poise that was unmistakably genuine. She didn't look at Connor. She knew his expression would only reflect his anger. For the first time, Mia didn't shrink back. Instead, she took her place at the table with undeniable dignity, ready to face whatever came next. Connor's eyes narrowed, his anger now a barely restrained fury. The evening had taken a turn he hadn't anticipated, and he could feel control slipping from his grasp. Wesley's probing, Mia's unexpected background, and her audacity to entertain his rival's offer. It was all more than he could tolerate. He managed to get through the rest of the dinner with gritted teeth, his outward calm a thin facade over a storm of resentment. When the dinner finally ended, Connor wasted no time. As they exited the restaurant, he gestured for Mia to follow him to a quiet side street, his expression dark and unreadable. Once they were out of earshot, he turned on her, his voice a low, furious hiss. "Just what game are you playing, Mia?" he demanded, his eyes blazing with anger. "All this time, you hid your background from me, making me look like a fool tonight. Do you enjoy humiliating me, or are you just out for revenge?" Mia's composure remained intact, but she could feel his anger radiating. She took a slow breath, choosing her words carefully. "There was no deception, Connor. I've never hidden who I am. You simply never bothered to ask." Her words were quiet, but they struck him like a whip. She met his gaze without flinching, her expression one of steady resolve. "And for the record, I didn't need to humiliate you. You've done a fine job of that all on your own." His face reddened, and he clenched his fists, clearly struggling to keep his temper in check. "Don't be so self-righteous," he snarled. "You've clearly enjoyed this, entertaining Wesley's offer like that. You think I don't see what you're doing?" Mia's eyes hardened, and for the first time, Connor saw a spark of defiance in her that he hadn't noticed before. "I'm not here to play games, Connor. But unlike you, I understand that a company is built on people, not just numbers and status. It's your complete disregard for anyone outside yourself that's driving your business to the ground." Her words cut deep, and for a moment, Connor looked genuinely shaken. But his pride was too deeply rooted to acknowledge the truth she spoke. "You think you're so insightful," he retorted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, let me remind you, you're nothing more than a housekeeper. Don't think you can just waltz back into the corporate world and pretend you belong." Mia's expression softened, but her eyes held a quiet strength. "I've spent years working for people like you, Connor. People who believe they're entitled to everyone's loyalty while giving nothing in return. I'm done standing in the shadows, pretending I'm less than what I am just to satisfy your ego." He glared at her, his face a mask of resentment and frustration, but she didn't waver. Turning to leave, she paused only briefly, looking back at him with a calm finality. "One day, you're going to realize that people aren't disposable. You may not understand it now, but you're going to need someone to trust in you when you have nothing left." With that, she walked away, leaving Connor standing alone in the shadows, stunned and speechless. He watched her figure disappear into the night, her words echoing in his mind with a force that left him shaken. For the first time, Connor felt the tremor of doubt within himself, a small, nagging voice that wondered if perhaps Mia was right, if perhaps he was on a path to losing everything. But his pride refused to accept it, and he steeled himself, determined not to let her get the better of him. In the weeks following that fateful dinner, Mia took a leap of faith and accepted Wesley's offer, officially joining his firm as a strategic consultant. It was a swift transition from the shadows to the spotlight, and she wasted no time in proving herself. Her sharp insights, her deep understanding of business strategy, and most importantly, her people-centered approach quickly made her a standout on Wesley's team. Her colleagues were impressed by her ability to see the bigger picture, crafting solutions that prioritized long-term growth over flashy quick wins. Under Mia's influence, Wesley's firm transformed. Her strategies were fresh, her execution impeccable, and she had a keen ability to rally people behind her ideas. With Mia on his side, Wesley had more than just a competent consultant. He had a secret weapon, one that Whitfield Enterprises' remaining investors couldn't help but notice. As Wesley's firm gained traction, investors who once favored Connor's company began to shift their interest, noticing Wesley's steady growth and ethical management style. Mia was, in essence, Wesley's gateway into Whitfield's fragile market, and Wesley relished the irony. Across town, Connor's empire was in trouble. He had tried everything in his arsenal to stabilize Whitfield Enterprises, but nothing seemed to work. His quick-fix solutions, all aimed at immediate results, were having the opposite effect. Each desperate decision seemed to push his staff further away. Departments that had once thrived on loyalty and unity began to fracture as people grew disillusioned with Connor's increasingly erratic leadership. Longtime employees left, his management team was divided, and morale plummeted. Connor, once the unshakable CEO, found himself battling a crisis not only of profits but of trust. A trust he had all but shattered. As the days dragged on, Connor couldn't deny a grim truth. Losing Mia had been a monumental mistake. Her quiet yet transformative influence had been one of the last stabilizing forces in his company, though he had refused to see it at the time. Without her, the delicate balance of Whitfield Enterprises unraveled further. Investors grew restless, questioning his judgment and leadership. He felt his control slipping, yet his pride wouldn't let him reach out to her. Despite knowing she could likely help him turn things around, he was too proud to admit he needed her. Meanwhile, Wesley's company continued to soar, and Mia was thriving. Her success and influence at Wesley's firm were undeniable, and word of her expertise spread quickly. Clients and investors praised her, and even Wesley, ruthless as he was, recognized that Mia's value went far beyond her strategies. She had become a respected force in the industry, her opinion sought after and her name synonymous with innovative thinking. Then came the day that would change everything. Wesley, emboldened by Mia's success, decided to make a bold move. He would initiate a corporate takeover of Whitfield Enterprises' most valuable assets. It was a strategy Mia had laid the groundwork for, though she hadn't fully anticipated Wesley's aggressive plan. He executed it swiftly, moving in on the core assets that Connor's company relied on most. The takeover stripped Whitfield Enterprises of its primary strengths, leaving Connor's once mighty empire vulnerable and exposed. When Connor received the news, it hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd seen signs of Wesley's interest in his assets, but he had been too distracted with internal crises to anticipate the full extent of the takeover. The realization dawned on him too late. His arrogance, his dismissive attitude, and his disregard for people had paved the way for this downfall. Wesley, with Mia's expertise, had outmaneuvered him in a way he hadn't expected. Desperation filled Connor as he realized the full scope of his loss. The investors he had relied on were slipping through his fingers, turning to Wesley's firm instead. He was losing everything, not because of external circumstances, but because of the walls he built around himself. He'd isolated himself with pride, and now the consequences were crashing down. The crisis reached a head when Connor's board of directors called an emergency meeting. He entered the room, trying to exude the same confidence he once had, but his usual charisma was dimmed, his expression taut with worry. The tension was thick in the air as board members glanced at one another, whispering in concerned tones. They knew the takeover had compromised the company's future, and they awaited Connor's explanation. Connor took a deep breath, ready to address the board, but as he looked across the table, his words froze in his throat. Sitting confidently among the board members, directly opposite him, was Mia. The sight of her, calm and self-assured, rocked him to his core. He hadn't seen her in weeks, not since that fateful night, and now she was here, representing Wesley's firm as a senior partner. Her steady gaze held no trace of malice, but Connor felt the weight of her presence like a judgment passed. She had risen above his dismissal, far beyond the confines he had imagined for her, and now she was seated at the very table he had once dominated. The silence stretched, and a murmur passed through the board members as they noticed Connor's reaction. The board chair cleared his throat, and with a somber expression, addressed Connor. "We're here to discuss the recent developments and what remains of Whitfield Enterprises' assets," he said. His tone was grave, his words slicing through Connor's last hope of control. Mia, remaining composed, began to speak, her voice clear and measured. "As you're all aware, Wesley's firm has acquired several key assets from Whitfield Enterprises. We believe there's potential for a mutually beneficial partnership moving forward." Her words were diplomatic, but there was an unspoken finality to them that Connor couldn't ignore. She was here as an equal, as the new power in the room. Connor's mind spun as he listened to her. He had lost control, lost his company's edge, and here was Mia, no longer the housekeeper he had overlooked, but a formidable professional sitting across from him with the upper hand. The room felt stifling, and his chest tightened with a mixture of anger, humiliation, and regret. He could see in Mia's expression that she felt no bitterness, no need for revenge. She was there purely to represent Wesley's interests, yet that only made his defeat more complete. For the first time, Connor felt the true cost of his actions. The pride that had blinded him, the arrogance that had isolated him, and his failure to see the value in others had all led to this moment. He had pushed away the one person who could have saved him, only to find her here, as a powerful ally of his rival. The meeting continued, but Connor's mind was elsewhere, lost in the weight of his mistakes. He listened as Mia laid out the future plan, her tone confident and composed, while he grappled with the crushing reality of his downfall. He was left with the bitter knowledge that he had lost everything, not to circumstances or fate, but to the consequences of his own choices. Connor felt a hollow ache as he watched Mia leave the boardroom, her calm expression unwavering even after she had effectively led the dismantling of his life's work. Every loss, every setback, had led him to this moment. Swallowing the last fragments of his pride, he hurried after her, reaching her just outside the building. "Mia," he called, his voice laced with desperation he couldn't hide. She paused, turning slowly, her expression neutral as she regarded him. He took a breath, feeling the weight of his words before they even left his lips. "I need your help," he admitted, his voice quieter. "Whitfield Enterprises. I can't save it on my own. Not after everything I've done." Mia's gaze was steady, but he could see the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. She crossed her arms, studying him. "And why would I help you, Connor?" she asked, her tone cool but not unkind. "After everything. You dismissed me, belittled my experience, and treated people as tools. Now, when it's all falling apart, you suddenly want my help." Connor nodded, swallowing hard. "I know I messed up, more than I could have imagined. But if there's anything left to salvage, I need someone like you, Mia. I need you." His voice cracked, his vulnerability laid bare. She sighed, glancing away as if weighing the weight of her next words. "All right," she said finally, meeting his gaze. "But on one condition. You work with me. As an equal. You listen to my advice, not as something optional, but as a partner. If you don't respect this agreement, I'm gone." Relief washed over Connor, and he nodded quickly, sensing that this might be his last chance at redemption. "You have my word," he promised. "I'll do whatever it takes." The first weeks were difficult. True to her word, Mia insisted on making every decision a collaboration. She introduced sweeping changes, prioritizing transparency and rebuilding trust within the company. For Connor, it was a brutal adjustment. He was accustomed to command, not consensus, and as he observed Mia rallying the employees with her genuine concern and clear communication, he began to see the flaws in his old methods. Slowly, he came to appreciate her approach, recognizing the strength of a leader who led through empathy rather than fear. Mia didn't spare him from the hard lessons, either. She challenged him, questioned his motivations, and forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his past choices. At first, he chafed against her directness, his pride stinging at every correction. But with time, he began to understand that this wasn't humiliation, it was growth. She was teaching him the art of humility, of placing people above profits, and of seeing the company as a community rather than a machine. He could feel himself changing. As his old habits faded, a new kind of satisfaction emerged, a pride in seeing his employees thriving, not just surviving. Meetings were no longer tense battlegrounds but discussions filled with respect, honesty, and a shared commitment to a common goal. He felt lighter, unburdened by the need to control everything, and more grateful than ever for Mia's influence. But just as Whitfield Enterprises was finding its footing again, another threat surfaced, this time from Wesley Grant himself. Wesley, who had once seen Mia as his key to growth, now viewed her as a threat to his dominance. In a shocking, ruthless move, Wesley accused Mia of corporate espionage, claiming she had leaked sensitive information to Connor's company. The accusation spread quickly, and whispers began to circulate, casting shadows over Mia's hard-earned reputation. Connor was furious. He knew Wesley's ploy was baseless and malicious, a desperate attempt to neutralize Mia's influence. But he also knew that Wesley had the resources and connections to make the allegations stick. Without hesitating, Connor decided to intervene. He immediately organized a press conference, using the platform to expose Wesley's false claims, presenting evidence and statements from trusted employees to clear Mia's name. His loyalty to Mia, once tenuous, had solidified into a genuine respect and admiration, and he was determined to protect her. In the aftermath, Wesley's reputation suffered, and he lost key partners who had finally seen the depths of his ambition. Mia's name was cleared, her integrity restored, and Connor's actions only strengthened the renewed trust within Whitfield Enterprises. Connor had not only defended Mia, but had cemented his own transformation from a man ruled by pride to one committed to loyalty and integrity. In a quiet moment after the storm had passed, Connor met with Mia in his office. "Mia," he said, his voice filled with gratitude, "I don't want this to be temporary. Whitfield Enterprises would be nothing without you. Will you stay on as my partner?" Mia considered him, and he saw the hint of a smile touch her lips. "As an equal partner?" she asked, her tone teasing but her gaze serious. Connor nodded, his voice sincere. "Yes, I promise you that." After a beat, she extended her hand. "Then let's make this work," she said, sealing their partnership with a handshake that carried the weight of trust, respect, and a shared vision. Together, they rebuilt Whitfield Enterprises from the ground up, instilling values of empathy, transparency, and integrity into every layer of the company. Connor's old tactics faded, replaced by policies that put people first, from mentorship programs to wellness initiatives. Mia's influence was felt in every corner of the company, and employees who once feared for their jobs now felt empowered and valued. Their partnership became legendary in the industry. Clients, investors, and competitors alike marveled at the transformed Whitfield Enterprises, a company no longer driven solely by profits but by a purpose. They began to receive accolades not just for financial performance, but for their positive impact on the community and their dedication to sustainable ethical growth. Over time, their partnership grew deeper, forged by mutual respect and the shared struggles that had brought them to this point. Together, they created a lasting legacy, proving that redemption and growth were possible, even in the most cutthroat of industries. Connor, once the emblem of arrogance, became known as a leader who had learned humility, and Mia's name was synonymous with resilience and wisdom. Their story became an inspiration, a cautionary tale for those who believed that success came only through ruthless ambition, and hope for those who sought a different path, one where values mattered as much as victories. Together, they had rebuilt not just a company, but a legacy that would stand the test of time, reminding the world that the true assets of any business were not found in profits, but in the people who made it all possible. If you enjoyed this story, pulse like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales.